This is about parliamentary procedure and understanding it as a tool. So there we go. This is the agenda we're going to follow. We're going to have introductions, talk about what parliamentary procedure is, what Robert's Rules of Order are, officer responsibilities, writing an agenda, making a motion, how to debate a motion, voting, and then just an overall review and questions and answers. Okay, so who am I? I think you just heard. I'm Debbie Munoz, and I am the president for the National Association of Parliamentarians in San Diego. We have our meetings down in Pacific Beach on Tuesday mornings, so anyone who's interested, you can always contact me, and we love people to come in and join us. Most of us, all of us that belong to the organization came from groups that were having problems. And we all understood that there were problems going on, but we didn't know exactly what Robert's rules were, how to follow them. And so everyone in our group belongs to another organization or more than one, and then learned more. We wanted to know more. Now I want to know, who are you? I already know that you're DLAC parents and some also ELAC parents. How many of you already heard me speak one time? Because this is my third time around. Okay, great. So then it's great to hear it again, because then you start to hear new things. And again, if you have any questions, I'm here to respond to those. And I'm hoping that you learn as much as you can from this, as well as it makes me start learning too. Because I was asked a couple of questions, I went back to my book, and just so you know, this is the short form of Robert's Rules. I have some in my car in case anybody wants them. These are the easy. This is easier. This is the real book. And you can see the difference. There's a lot of information in here. There's examples in here. This book used to be 500 pages when General Robert wrote the book, and now it's grown to over 1,000 pages. So what is parliamentary procedure? Parliamentary procedure is the rules and ethics and customs, let's see, where's my light, governing meetings and the operation of clubs and organizations. It is the rule of the majority with respect to the minority. What does that mean? That means that when you vote, the majority wins. They're the ones that's the way it goes. What does it mean to be respectful to the minority? You're listening to them, you're allowing them to speak, you're allowing them to give their discussion. But again, it's the majority that rules. That's when you hold up your paddles and you vote, but it's with respect to the minority. The most common procedure is Robert's Rules of Order. There are other parliamentary procedures that are around. The legislature uses a different one. Some school districts use different parliamentary procedure. But in your bylaws, your rule of order is Robert Rules of Order. So if you look at your bylaws, that's what. So we are going to talk about Robert's Rules. There are others, like I said, Standard Code of Parliamentary Procedures. Some school boards use others. But we're going to talk just about Robert's Rules of Order. When I first joined the organization and they got up and started talking, they would say, Robert this and Robert that and Robert, and I'd say, who's Robert? Robert is the one who wrote the book, and he lived from 1837 to 1923. He was a general with the U.S. Army, and he was served in the Army. When he went to a church meeting in 1887, so he was already had been a general, already had been very involved with government issues and the service, but when he went to a church meeting, it was so chaotic with people yelling, people out of order, people insulting one another, people saying disrespectful things to one another, that because of that, he came home that night and said, I need to write out the rules for parliamentary procedure. And he wanted them to be very simple. And they now are in the 11th edition. And they are much They're still simple-ish, but we have a simpler book. Like I said, this is the simpler book. All right, so again, we talk about that the majority rules with respect to the minority. The object is to allow deliberation upon questions of interest within the organization. And then this is done through debate. So basically, when someone makes a motion, someone makes a second, and then you say, is there any discussion? That's the debate part of the whole thing. That's when you talk and you allow everyone to get a chance to say what they need to say. It is up to the president or the parliamentarian in your group to say, you know what, it looks like you're coming to some sort of understanding. So you ask, I think we're ready for a vote. And then you bring it to a vote. Also, we'll talk about the amount of time to speak, but in your DLAC bylaws, it talks about 2 minutes per person issue, okay? And again, this is done through debate, and then you have your vote. Oops. Okay. So, parliamentary procedure has been around for many, many years, and in 1560, Sir Thomas Smythe wrote for the House of Commons in England some basic rules, and to this day the rules still take effect, which is one subject should be discussed at one time. I see this a lot during meetings. Somebody makes a motion, they make a motion. I think we should have a picnic and use no more than $100 for a picnic. That's the motion. Somebody says, I second. They open it for a discussion. Somebody raises their hand. They say, I don't know. I'd rather go to the beach. I don't know if we should really go to the picnic. So that is sort of related, not really related. You really want to discuss whether you feel that we should go to the picnic or not. So someone would stand and say, I don't think we should go to a picnic because nobody ever shows up. The last one we had, no one went. So again, the discussion is related to the motion. You don't allow a lot of discussion that's not related to the motion. All right, so that's one thing, one subject at a time. Personal attacks are to be avoided. You do not attack people. You do not say, you don't know what you're talking about. You do not say, you're a liar. You do not say, I know someone else that can do a better job than you. I don't know. You do not attack or be disrespectful, something that's been going on for years, as far as not allowing that. And there are ways we can talk about on how to deal with issues like that. And then debate must be limited. Now, in your bylaws, whoops, it's right here. In your bylaws, you actually have the 2-minute guideline. Okay. Business is done through motions which cause action. Members bring business before the assembly through a main motion. Parliamentary procedure also allows for rules in regards to nominating, voting, and disciplinary action, appeals, dues, all of the things, even changing your bylaws. All of that is done through motions. A motion, a second, discussion, a vote. Always those 4 ways. And I have to say, yes, the other day, Anna, all of you know Anna Simpson, right? She's your advisor. She sent me, she said she got some of these rules that I guess she's going to give out, but they go in very deeply on Robert's rules. I mean, this book is big. We could spend, I mean, I've been going for 4 years and I don't think we've covered all of the book. But what we do learn is that the more involved you are, the more you know where to look. So you don't know all the answers, but at least you know where to look. So, let's see. What is the responsibility of the president or the presiding officer? The responsibility is to keep order. One person is chosen to preside over the meeting. Usually it's the president, and they refer to him as a chair. The president sets the tone. They're the ones in charge. They're the ones saying, do I hear a motion? Do I hear a second? And the vote, and any kind of making sure that everyone has a chance to speak and everyone feels as though they've had a voice. In your bylaws, it says the president presides over the DLAC meeting, observing and adhering to the agenda and the meeting time.
If I could interrupt you for 1 second, please. So this also applies at your school site council meetings. All of our meetings are governed by Robert's Rules of Order. Your school site council, your ELACs, and our DPAC committee. So we have several committees represented today.
Okay,
So
great. All of them. So I'm saying
yes.
DLAC, but it's DPAC and
all
all.
of our committees pretty much. So if you're coming from school site council, whoever the chair of the school site council is, that would be their job.
And do we have presidents here within the groups? Are there people here that are like the president? Raise your hand. Yeah, if you're president, you're the one that sets the tone. You're the one that's sort of in charge. You're the one that's going to say that we're following the rules, we're following a motion. You help someone with the motion if they have trouble making a motion. So you set the tone. Vice president, it's pretty simple under your bylaws. It says that the vice president, when designated by the president, presides over the meeting. So if the president can't show up that time, the vice president will step in. They carry out the duties assigned by the president. So the job of the vice president seems like a pretty nice job. Secretary is a bigger job. That's probably one of the biggest jobs usually. Secretary will take notes during the meeting, during regular meetings and special committee meetings. They attend the meetings with a copy of the bylaws, and they also establish whether there's a quorum available. Now, we have 13 for
DLAC. Yeah.
for DLAC.
So quorum is defined in your bylaws for whatever committee you're a member of.
I have a copy of the DLAC bylaws here. I don't know, but
It's okay.
basically all of you should have them. Oh, okay, you have them. So if you look there, you'll be able to see it's usually bylaws for an organization are very easy to follow. They'll say how you elect your people. It says what you need for a quorum, how many representatives you will have. So the secretary's duty is to record the minutes. She writes what is done, not said. You're not writing every single word. You're not writing what someone said. You're doing what has been done. So clearly, when you make a motion, that is something that has been done. Debbie Munoz, I want to make a motion that we adjourn the meeting. So that is something that was done. I may have said it, but it was done. I made a motion, somebody seconded. Is there any discussion? No, everybody wants to go home? Great. All those in favor? Aye. Ayes have it. That was what was done, not what was said. No quotes are recorded. You don't even have to write who made the second. All you have to do is make who wrote the first and last name. You can write it was seconded. You don't need to write the name. Just first, who wrote it, who did the first, what the motion was. You get the exact wording of the motion. And then if during the discussion it's very heated, people have very strong opinions, one person wants this, one person wants that, you don't have to be writing, well, this person was fighting and this person said this. It's all about discussion ensued, concerns about, and you can write one, there were concerns about the concern, but the rebuttal was this. So you can write down that there was some issues so that you will remember for your minutes, but you don't need to. If it's very easy, all you have to do is say discussion ensued, and then you take a vote. I looked up and down your bylaws on voting, and I know that all of you vote by paddle. Do you count your paddle votes? Okay. Because you don't have anything in your bylaws, and in Robert's rules, there are quite a few ways to vote, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But basically, it's generally a sense. If you're seeing everybody's paddles going up and you only see 2 down, you don't really need to say anything other than the ayes have it. Or if you see no ayes and all nays, but you have to at least have 1 aye, because usually the person who made the motion is going to vote for it. But you would write down the ayes have it, the nays have it. motion carried or motion denied if it didn't carry. Again, you can send out, this is the other thing that's important, minutes are sent out ahead of time. So when they are sent out ahead of time, they're draft minutes. If you realize that your name is spelled incorrectly, or the name of a city, or the motion wasn't made exactly the way you remember it, you can write the secretary, you can write whoever you're supposed to contact and say, I think the minutes are incorrect on this. She contacts the secretary and the correction is made if it's okay. However, once the minutes are brought to the meeting, they then belong to the organization. At that point, someone has to say, when the president says, are there any corrections to the minutes? And you raise your hand and say, I'd like to correct the minutes, it should be blah, blah, blah. Then, if the president is feeling, yes, I agree, are there any other corrections? If someone says, well, I didn't hear that, then a motion can be made to make those changes. But typically, that's not what happens. It's just someone makes a correction and it's corrected. Once minutes are brought to the assembly, they belong to the group and they're recorded as a correction with the strikeout. Yes?
Question. With the DLAC, we have very specific requirements by the EDCO to address certain issues as you were listening to before. What I've heard before is that when they have been, the district comes and gets its review, it has been advised by the Department of Ed to make sure that in the minutes, they write a record. As you said, it doesn't have to say the whole discussion back and forth, but keep a record of the questions and concerns of the parents and the responses from the district, whether it's that they were able to respond or they're going to bring back a response, to keep track of how they are addressing the requirements that we're supposed to meet. From what I heard right now, you were saying it's not required by Robert's rules, but since it's a requirement.
Exactly, and that's a good point, which I brought up one of the other times, is that you follow your bylaws first. You follow the rule of your bylaws, and if it's the rules of county ed or whatever the recommendations, you do what they tell you. If there's ever questions and it's not specifically written in your bylaws, that's when you refer to Robert, because that's sort of the deciding factor if there's a big issue. So you do follow the recommendations at the county. However, I don't think that they want people's quotes. They just want questions and what's going to happen. So that makes a lot of sense. If there's an issue, you write it down. This was brought up during the motion. This will be looked into. President wants us to go to the committee. No vote was taken. Again, those are things that were done, not said. You're going to go to committee. You're going to do this.
And we're allowed to, for FPM purposes, we do upload all the feedback from the committee on that specific topic. So it is not required to be in the minutes per se. The feedback can be uploaded as a separate document, which is what we're able to do.
Okay, so now in your bylaws, I am guessing that all of the bylaws sort of follow the same rule of thumb, that your parliamentarian calls the meeting to order, they monitor the adherence of the order, they monitor the time limits, they make sure that the topic is being covered correctly and you're not going off topic, they make sure that you're following Robert's rules, and then they coordinate and support the president, and she calls the meeting to order. They also should have, your parliamentarians should come to a meeting with Robert's rules, not the short one, but the long one, or both, so that if anything comes up, they can look it up. Again, copy of the bylaws, copy of Robert's rules, and if they want a short form. All right, under your, and again, it's DLAC, but I'm thinking it might be all of your bylaws, Article 3, Section 5, time limits are strictly adhered to for DLAC meetings, except when a motion is approved to allow for longer discussion. So if you know it's going to be a big deal and there's something coming up and you know that 2 minutes isn't going to be enough, you can have someone, you can, as a president, say, we're going to be talking about whether to buy a swimming pool for the school. I know that you can't, but, and you know that there's going to be a lot of discussion, you can say, I'd like to have a motion to extend discussion to 4 minutes per person, or something to that effect. So you can make a motion to extend the time, but your bylaws do say 2 minutes per person. And I know it's going to come up. Okay. So, yes.
And I apologize, but
No.
for clarity, during the meeting,
Yes.
if at the beginning the rule is 2 minutes per person, and 3 people have asked and taken 2 minutes, and then someone stands up and suddenly it changes, so you know what, we need to only let you speak 1 minute. Can that happen, or does it have to be uniform, everyone the same?
Well, if everyone, it's a 2-minute limit, which means that if you can speak for 30 seconds, we're not going to make you talk for 2 minutes.
Right.
You can speak for less. But if somebody gets up and you don't like what they're saying, remember, if it's not related to the motion, you can call them out of order. And as the president, you can say, you can stop this. You are out of order because this is not what we're talking about. And then you continue, and if they want to continue talking, we'll talk about that, but you can reprimand them, and that can go in the minutes that they're being reprimanded.
Just real quick, what if 2 people speak for 2 minutes, then someone is speaking and we allow them, I really like what she's saying, so I'm gonna let her speak for 2 more minutes, and then the next person I want to enforce again the 2 minutes. No?
2, 2, 2. And the way it typically works, I don't know if I'm coming up to it. I know it's in there somewhere. Yeah.
Well, you said that, okay, well, maybe I heard it wrong. But you said that when we like have 5 people that talk, and we had like 20, and the 5 people, and we had extra time, they could talk again if nobody else wanted to talk.
Right. Okay. So that's what I was looking for in my, I don't know exactly where it's at here. So basically, we'll talk about it. So if the slide shows up, we'll skip it. So basically what happens is someone makes a motion. Someone says a second. Usually the second doesn't mean they agree with you. It just means they want to talk about it. Okay? So the second doesn't mean, yeah, I'm going to vote with you. It means I want to hear what you have to say about this. So they make the second. Now, you made the motion. You get to defend it first. So as president, you would say, could you please defend your motion? Would you like to defend your motion? You get up and you talk. I made this motion because I think a swimming pool at the school would be really great, and I think our DLEC funds meet the criteria for a swimming pool. So then the president says, is there an opposing view? Not somebody else that's going to support it, because the rule is that you take turns. So you allow one pro and one against. So as president, I'm watching the time and I go, wow, we've got like 20 more items on the agenda for this. They want this discussion to hurry up. So they're not going to let a lot more discussion. They're going to ask for against and for and against maybe a few times. But again, as president, you're looking at the time, your parliamentarian's looking at the time. You decide when it's sort of calming down that you want to have a vote. But it's alternate, alternate, alternate. And if somebody else gets up to speak for it, you say, thank you. Is there anybody else against it? None? Let's have a vote, because now you're hearing more people are for it. And you don't need to use a lot of time for it if you already are. Okay? So the other thing that happens in your bylaws, it talks about the school reports are filled. And again, you use that time if you have time on your agenda. Yes.
Another organization that I'm a part of, something similar. We follow Robert's rules, but still vote, right? And so it may or may not be majority, but if someone opposes, whether it be one person or 20, we'll say, those that oppose with someone, they'll voice their opinion, and then we'll ask, now that y'all heard the opinion of those that oppose, would it possibly sway anyone's vote? If so, do we want to have a revote?
So that's not quite right, because what happens is the discussion portion, and that's why you don't want to allow a lot of proxy voting. I don't know if you allow voting by proxy, but basically The whole idea of having a first and a second in the discussion is that everyone can hear the pros and the cons during the discussion so that when they vote, they're ready to vote. Okay? It's not like, oh, you're against it, so why are you against it? You want us? Because maybe we'll change our mind. You can't have a revote. So you can only vote for that issue once. So the discussion portion is where you do your pros and cons, so everybody can vote. Yeah.
Now, let's just say they're not it's just kind of like a question and answer section on a presentation that was presented. After I spoke, I need to let everyone else have a chance to speak prior to me speaking again.
Well, if it's a presentation and it's not within your meeting, your agenda, remember,
It is an agenda item. Like,
well, your agenda item is have me speak, right? Okay, so we're not following Robert's Rules of Order right now because I'm your presenter, I'm giving some information and you're asking questions. So when that is happening, that's not your meeting. Robert's Rules are only for when there is a meeting. Now, if you're talking about reports, like someone is giving a report, say you gave the committee, you made your committee go out to investigate whether a swimming pool would be appropriate. And your committee's coming back to give its report. And they give the report, you can say, are there any questions? The secretary writes, the swimming pool committee gave the report. Questions were asked about blah, 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 blah. How much is it going to cost? What kind of funds do we need? Will the district support us? And so you can write those questions down because those are pertinent to the report. Then the results are, do we need a motion? Do we want to go back to committee? Does the committee want to investigate more? And that's when you go back to, is that sort of what you're talking about? When the report is given and then there's questions?
just like when there's a large group, like I know with school site council, it's kind of small, so it seems like everyone gets a chance to speak. But when there's very large groups, just so that other people get it, especially when it's time is so limited, is it, I guess, a regulation to just speak and then let everyone else have a vote, and then once you don't have, or not a vote, but
Specific to our committees, our DLAC, DPAC, and ELAC, the agenda sets the time limit for that topic. So if at the end, if everyone wanted to talk for 2 minutes, that's not possible. We have a finite set of time because we need to move on to the next item on the agenda. So not everyone is going to get 2 minutes because,
So-
we have 20 people and it's not a voting item. So in our DLAC, DPAC, and often in our ELAC, we're not voting on whether or not we should have programs for English learners. You're learning about the programs for English learners and asking questions about them. There's no voting that takes place.
But I
School site
think
council
the
is
other,
different.
and the other question is, in your agenda, if you only allow something 10 minutes, and you've already had 5 people, if you only allow 10 minutes on a subject, and you've already had 5 people speak their 2 minutes, there's your 10 minutes. Well, when you get to person number 4, and you only have 10 minutes, your president, your parliamentarian is going, okay, we've had 4 people, and I got 10 hands are up on this. She might say, do I have a motion to extend discussion? Someone makes a motion, you take a vote. Yes, we want to extend discussion, or no, we don't. Follow the rule, and then either you decide to discuss a little longer or you stop discussion and then take a vote on the motion without getting too complicated. So, because again, I want to keep it pretty easy to follow. So basically an agenda looks at the meeting that's called to order, reading and approval of minutes, and then reports. It's not old business, it's unfinished business. It's a semantic thing, but it gives you a better idea. It's not finished. And then new business and adjournment. So let's go back to the secretary's minutes. When the minutes have been read, after they've been read, the president says, are there any corrections to the minutes? People say yes, no, but then what happens is the secretary must cross it out and put in new words so that so the correction is noted, and in her new minutes, she's going to put corrections were made to the minutes. After the corrections have been made, The president says if there are no further corrections, the minutes are approved. No voting. Or if no one has any corrections, because they've all been corrected ahead of time, she'll say the minutes are approved as presented or as read or as emailed, but no voting. It's just something that happens. The approval process is by people bringing it up. Minutes are not voted on. After the minutes have been approved, the assembly hears reports, and she would say, may I have a report from this company or this group? No votes needed unless a motion is being requested. The report will be filed as presented. Remember, to make a motion, someone stands up, they give their name, their school, I move that. A second is needed before discussion. If somebody stands up to make a motion and nobody agrees and there is no second, the end, over. You move on to the next item. You need a second before you can, and you shouldn't be discussing things without a motion. In other words, somebody stands up and starts talking. As the presiding officer, you say, excuse me, could I have a motion first? So you get a gist of what they're saying. And motions should be pretty simple, easy. 5, 10 words, 20, 15 words, not too long. And then a vote is taken. The primary purpose of the meeting is that you follow the rules of order so everyone feels like they've had a say in what is going to happen. All right. A person is asked to be recognized when the presiding officer recognizes them. Then they have the floor, they have the 2 minutes. They sit down and yield the floor to someone else. And again, it's I move, and after making a motion, he sits down, the second is made. Okay. And all you have to do is make a second. Now, a lot of times we'll hear in the meetings, I so move, that you don't do that. You have to actually state the motion. And it is up to the president or the parliamentarian to repeat the motion before the vote. You have to be very clear, and if you aren't sure, you ask the secretary, could you please repeat the motion? Because everyone needs to understand how the motion is exactly, if she wrote it right, and if you're voting for the same thing, because there's nothing worse than someone saying, well, wait a minute, I thought we were voting on this. So the best way is always repeat the motion. It's important that everyone in the group know exactly what the motion is. And the chairperson can help the person make the motion if it's a little wordy. Yes? No.
Sorry for that. So would it be the correct way to say, okay, we need someone to make the motion so we can approve it?
Yes. And then someone says, well, I so move. And you go, no, you need to make a motion. And they go, well, how do I do that? And you help them. Say, I move that. And then they say, I move that. And you say that we blah, blah, blah. And then they say it. And then the secretary will say, Mary made a motion that blah, blah, blah. And the president can help with the wording. The parliamentarian can help with the wording. But again, a motion has to be written. It cannot be, I so move.
Now, after the motion's made,
You need a second.
and a second, and there's a few discussion, and in an example, let's say that suddenly within the discussion, more confusion is made than clarity. So people are confused as to what's going on. But someone says, you guys have to vote to approve it, otherwise the kids won't get the money. So then everybody's approving it because they don't want the kids to not get the money.
Right,
Is
but see
that
again,
correct?
well, remember, the discussion should be specifically related to the motion. So if the discussion starts getting off or confusing, you need to bring it back, and you need to, whoever confused it, go back and say, could you please clarify what you're saying? Or say, that is out of order. You're not discussing something related to what we want. Let's go back. You want to eliminate confusion and make it easier, okay? And if it's out of order, the chair rules. The motion is not in order. If somebody stands up and says, well, I want to order motion, they just say it's not in order. The chair must determine that a motion is clearly phrased, so they help out. You're taking pictures of that. Is that good? Okay. All right, after the second has been made, again, the debate, you take turns, and 2 minutes, and I think we talked about that. And someone else can think, you know what, this discussion has gone on long. They can say, are you ready for, the president can say, are you ready for the question? Or someone says, I'm ready for a vote. And they restate the motion, and then the motion is voted on. There's different types of voting. There's 7 ways to vote. However, in DLAC, or in your district, you vote, DLAC and EPAC, you'd vote with paddles. All right, so those in favor of the motion say aye or lift your paddle, and you just go by the majority. You say the motion passes or not. Now, if it's so close you can't tell, that's when you can start counting. But typically, if it's pretty easy, you say motion passes. And you don't have to list who voted for what. That's another form of voting. And again, you don't have it in your bylaws, so you don't really have to make changes to that.
So they're individually saying
No, the president says, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No.
I just didn't understand the difference between the second and the third bullet.
Can we go backwards? One?
Yeah, you have to pull it, there's a little,
Oh.
a little back arrow. We'll get you there.
Okay. All right, so the chair says, those in favor of the motion say aye, and they say aye. Then she says, those opposed say no. It's a separate thing. Those opposed say no. And then she looks, and then she makes her judgment.
Okay, so the person that says, if we only have one person that says no, you don't have to write that person in the minutes.
Remember, yeah. All you have to do is say, motion carried, motion denied. Unanimous, if everybody, yes.
You have to make sure that you ask for the names, right?
Well, yes, you do have to ask for nays. You can't just assume that because everybody's got their paddle, there's no nays. You say, are the, all those opposed? And then they do, and you'll say, motion carried. Well, abstaining is like a no vote, but you can ask if somebody's abstained, but it really doesn't help you one way or the other.
Suppose the person say, I want this and this, and oppose, like say no. But then you, about that bias, they have to write it down, so we wait for the write it down. When I see the parliamentary, I ask him, can you give me whatever you ask, to write it down? And then in a minute, it's already 3 times she opposed. She said, no, I don't do. What the parliamentary do in case they.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand the question again.
I was confused too either that time, like, ¿habla español?
Sí, sí, entiendo español y puedo hablar.
Me tocó ser
Así.
parlamentaria, es un ejemplo. Me tocó ser parlamentaria y la persona estaba diciendo que se oponía y quería que lo escribieran en papel. Entonces yo fui, nos dieron los papelitos para que escribiéramos lo que querían oponerse. Todas que las personas, casi varias me lo entregaron, pero la persona que estaba más enojada o seria o no sé cómo decirle, se opuso. Ya me dice, no escribo, no quiere nada escrito. Yo o la persona que esté como parlamentaria, ¿qué le puede decir? No, gracias.
Well, I'm not sure I follow that, except,
Yo me quedé confundida porque
okay, I'm not sure, no estoy segura que estoy siguiendo eso, porque la única manera, well, I don't know, is there anyone that does not speak Spanish? Okay, the only reason to help the secretary, and you're going to make a motion, you can write a motion ahead of time and say, I'm going to make, and you keep it, so the writing, and you can help the secretary and give the motion to the secretary. That's about the only thing that could be written. So I don't know what you're talking about that has to be written. But,
el papelito azul, el nuevo papelito azul.
Oh.
is that to make a motion?
No, pero era para algo que teníamos que entregar. Yo me quedé, me perdí.
I want to make sure I cover all this. Is that sort of related or not?
And it's very specific to one committee.
Oh, okay.
We can talk about that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Because I want to make sure I didn't have, I want to make sure I get through all of it. Okay, so when the voting is complete, the chair announces the results. The ayes have it, motion is carried, or the nays have it, the motion does not carry. And again, there's voice. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those, show of hands. You can do show of hands or paddles. You can do counted vote by standing or sitting or counting paddles. A ballot vote. But again, your district uses the paddles, and that's fine. You don't need to count, though, and you don't need to name who did what. Okay, so I was going to have us look at the bylaws, but we're going to skip that because it's already getting late. But let's talk about if someone is challenging. According to Robert's rules, all persons present at a meeting have an obligation to obey the legitimate orders of the presiding officer. If the presiding officer says you are out of order, they respect that they are being told they're out of order. In dealing, and also in Robert's rules, in dealing in any case of disorder in a meeting, the presiding officer should always remain calm and a deliberative tone. I'm sorry, but you are out of order. And that is going to be an action, and the secretary will write down Mrs. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so was found to be out of order. It's in the minutes because that was something that was done. Okay? So you make sure you write down, because then when it's written down, it's there. Then you have documentation. So if you find out that this person keeps coming back and doing things, being disruptive, you have records. And your bylaws say that if, under Robert's rule, the chair simply raps lightly on the table and says, points out the fault. Oops, let's go back again. I get sort of excited. Okay, they rap, they point to the fault, and they advise the member to avoid it. So they let the member know what you're saying is out of order, what you're saying is being disruptive, what you're saying is not helpful to the organization. And then an example would be Mrs. A, the chair has repeatedly directed you to refrain from offensive language, and then you write in the minutes, Mrs. So-and-so was reprimanded, called out of order. Okay, an organization or assembly has the ultimate right to make and enforce its own rules and to require that its members refrain conduct injurious to the organization for its purpose. No one should be allowed to remain a member if his retention will do this kind of harm. Yeah, just a moment. One more thing. In your bylaws, it specifically says any officer can be removed from his or her seat by 3/4 vote of the board members, excluding that one officer. Only in cases of tie from the board, the decision will be made by the voting member of DLAC during the meeting. What this means is if you have been reprimanded meeting, and it's on the third meeting, you can be asked not to attend, and without you being in present, they can vote you out. It can become a motion. Do we allow this person to stay in this committee? She's being too disruptive. And 3/4 vote. And the person can be removed from the group permanently. Yes?
For clarification, because that was part when they were revising that, when they said officers, they were specifically speaking of the board members, the 5-member officers. That's why it says 3.
Well, I sort of took it as though each one of you are represented. When you're here at a DLAC meeting or a DPAC meeting, you're representing your school, so you are the officer. So I think that's what it's talking about in this context, right?
No.
So it's written about the president, secretary, parliamentary, and it is specific to that 5.
Oh, okay.
However, there is a place in the DLAC bylaws by which a member can be removed.
Yes.
Yes. But it's
yeah.
not it's a different process.
It's a different one,
Yes.
okay. The whole thing is be polite, be respectful, be understanding that people are not all going to agree with you, or they are going to agree with you. And it's not a matter of whether they like you or not. It's about whatever you're talking about, whether they agree or disagree. Yeah.
I'm so sorry, but she has a question and you say wait and then you answer the question for her. So
Oh, I apologize. Yes.
So in our particular meeting, four of us that are the officers, none of us happen to speak Spanish. We have a member that often comes so fast, the translators can't even. So we don't even know she's out of order until she's been rambling. How would you suggest we handle her or him?
Well, remember, as president, as parliamentarian, as the board, when this person is about to speak, because as the presiding officer, it's your decision whether you want to recognize that person or not to speak. Just because they're here doesn't mean they get to speak. They have to be recognized. They stand up and say, you know, when they say they're from a certain school and that, and you say, yes, what is your motion? Or you can say, you have 2 minutes, please make your motion. You can be preemptive and let her know ahead of time. You have 2 minutes to say what you'd like. And somebody times, and if it's over the 2 minutes, you say, I am confused about your question, we're moving on. Did you hear that? I don't think. If the question is going on and on, you can say we're confused at the 2 minute. When they say bing, 2 minutes, you say I'm confused about your question. We're going to move on to the next item.
Written down, like, for that particular person or that committee?
You can, as a rule, what you can start doing, although it gets a little bit interesting, but you can ask people to write their motions down and hand them to you, like your parliamentarian can pick them up and then bring them up to the meeting so that when it's their time for the question, the motion's already pre-written and that person who made the motion stands up and says their motion, and then it's clearly written. Because what's really not respectful is when you have somebody that rambles and doesn't really point and distracts and takes away from the flow of the meeting. Because again, all of you are volunteers. You're all here volunteering. You're all here on your own time. You want to have not a good, whooping, wonderful time, but you just don't want to leave being upset because you didn't get a chance to speak or because somebody insulted you or because somebody insulted someone else. You want to go away feeling like something good happened.
A small example, fully truthful, but like we might be talking about equal opportunity or safety. I've been speaking, she'll talk about how the coffee tastes like crap and the parking lot is dirty and the bathroom doesn't have the toilet.
Right, and the minute you say that is out of order, right now we're discussing this, I am warning you. And again, put it in the minutes that she has been called out of order. You stay calm and you stay in charge.
And the benefit, we typically have 2 interpreters in our, you've seen our 2 district interpreters. So in that moment, when a member is speaking in a language, you just put your headphones on and they're going to be right there in the other language. And right there, it's all of our interpreters are simultaneous so that, and if it's not making sense to you in English, it's probably not making sense.
That's what I was talking about. And then when they told me to make her feel better, write down with your ideas and what you want to tell me. I tell them nice and neat. You guys that? No. I just post.
So, you know what, don't worry about it because if she isn't going to take the time to write it clearly, it means she just wants to be. And I have to tell you, at the last presentation, there was a person present who I didn't understand her question. So basically, and this is not, we're not having a meeting. I'm just giving a presentation, and basically I said, I'm really sorry, I don't understand your question. Can you restate it? And so that sort of helps people understand that they need to be a little clearer. It's not their meeting, it's our meeting. Okay?
That's what I said. Like, even I have another people, they come to talk by my school, and I say, I am representing. You don't talk by my school. They get offended.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to ask them to respect the way they teach it, the school teach me. But still, it's people that.
Yeah, some people are not, and that's, and that you're going to meet that everywhere. I mean, I go to meet, like, again, the people in my group we all joined because we all came from meetings that were not quite, there wasn't something right about it. So, thank you.
Una pregunta, yo quisiera hacer una pregunta.
Sí.
Por ejemplo, yo estuve en una reunión donde una persona alteró el orden al interior de la reunión. Entonces, esto pasó en México. Y el presidente de la reunión le dijo que no faltara el respeto a la mesa directiva ni a los miembros de la reunión. Y se lo dijo 3 veces y le advirtió que si en la tercera vez que le decían no se abstenía de eso, que iba a llamar a la fuerza pública. La persona no se abstuvo, entró la policía y se la llevó. La persona.
Yeah.
No sé si eso califica.
So, eso,
You don't want to do that, but yeah.
so,
You don't want to have the police coming in.
and you know what, I'm gonna actually answer this one in English. So, the ed code protects the school from any person that is interfering with the legal requirements of the school function. If a person is being disruptive towards what the school needs to get done, they can be physically removed, and in fact, they can be banned from ever entering that campus. So that's when a school resource officer might get called in, because you cannot disrupt the legal function of a school. At the district, while we are still protected by the same ed code, we don't have officers, and we shouldn't need to, because we're all adults that have volunteered. Well, I work here, but the parents who come are volunteers who have been, you've volunteered to be here. But at a school site, and I was a principal for a few years, at a school site, if anybody disrupts the legal requirements, they can be removed by force by the police, because you cannot disrupt the legal function of a school. So, and it's really about protecting students and teachers. And since at our DLAC and ELAC, we really don't have, our DPAC and DLAC, we don't have students or teachers that are at risk of being harmed, we wouldn't remove someone by police force. So I just want to clarify that, because, principals may avail themselves of that because the safety of staff and students could be at risk by a disruptive individual.
I did want to mention one thing that I remember that I forgot. Your secretaries are legal record of what happened. They're legal record. So if you sign in and you forget to sign in and the secretary is writing down who was in attendance, that is a legally binding document. If you didn't sign in and then you look at the minutes and you go, oops, she didn't write my name down, and then she looks and says, well, you didn't sign in, she can't go back and put that you were there because she has to follow the record. This is so legally binding that if, say, you are called into court for a completely different reason, and they say, well, you were over at a shopping center doing whatever, and you go, no, I was sitting at my DPAC meeting that day. And they go, well, prove it. You can go to your minutes and show I was at the meeting. But if your name isn't there, of course you can't. So that's how legally binding they are. So the courts will recognize these records as legally binding records. So just remember that, yeah.
And I apologize, but you just prompted a question on me. So on the minutes, should we just be putting on the minutes a list of the people that were present, or just a full list and then a check mark by the people that were
You can do it either way.
Okay.
You can do whatever is for your tradition, your way. I go to some meetings, we list present and we list absent. On some meetings, it's a list and you just check who's there. It just depends, but basically you want to show who's there, or you don't, or you also can put in who was tardy. Because again, if you're very close to a quorum and you don't have a quorum, you don't have a quorum, you can have a meeting, but you cannot have a motion or vote. But if all of a sudden your quorum shows up, then you can start having your meeting, but you can put, she, came in late, but she was here, and then she was there in time for the motions. Okay? Thank you.